but we should be ready soon. I just see it is online, so I think we are ready to start. Ambassador, are you ready?
Yes, thank you. Very good.
Perfect.
I'm ready, and good day to everybody. Thank you so much for being here today and for joining us in a virtual celebration of the entry into force of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. Before we start, I would like to give you some technical information. We have included in the chat box a link to the public transmission of the event. Therefore, we would like to request for those that are not speakers on the event or delegates from the permanent missions, if you could please watch the event through that link to avoid any eventual saturation of the WebEx platform. Moreover, also in the chat box, we have included the list of speakers that have already registered to take the floor. And we invite you all to put their names so we can give you the floor accordingly if you are planning to speak. Thank you so much. Now let me start. And my name is Socorro Flores. And on behalf of the permanent missions of Austria, Brazil, Costa Rica, Indonesia, Ireland, Mexico, Nigeria, New Zealand, South Africa, and Thailand in Geneva, New York, and Vienna to the UN, it is a real honor to welcome you all. The world has felt the devastating humanitarian consequences of the detonation of nuclear weapons. The UN was born with the promise of eradicating such dangerous weapons from the world. In UNGA resolutions adopted since 1946, in the outcome of the first special session of the General Assembly to Disarmament, in treaties establishing nuclear weapon-free zones, and in the NPT, the cornerstone of the disarmament and non-proliferation regime, countries have committed to eliminate nuclear weapons. However, 75 years after the first resolution was adopted, such commitments remain unfulfilled. The path has been long and difficult, but the adoption of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons represents a major step forward towards that common objective. For the first time in history, the international community has adopted a clear legal norm prohibiting nuclear weapons, and today, that unequivocal norm is alive and in force. The treaty, adopted by 2/3 of the UN membership, demonstrates the strong and legitimate international support for a permanent end to the threat posed by nuclear arms and show a heartening commitment to multilateral nuclear disarmament. Today, the TPNW becomes an important component of the nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation regime and enables states that choose to subscribe to some of the highest available multilateral norms against nuclear weapons. It is a good news when the worldwide concerns over nuclear weapons are highest they have been since the Cold War. This event celebrates precisely that. In addition, the entry into force of the TPNW marks the beginning of another journey towards the achievement of the goals of the treaty. There is a lot of work to do, and this event will also highlight the importance of the implementation of the treaty at the national and international level. So let's proceed now with the opening segment of the meeting. We have tried to assemble in this part representatives from the different stakeholders that have been involved in the process since its inception, conceptualization, negotiation, and promotion of the entry into force of the treaty. After their statements, I will open the floor to receive comments from all participants. And let me now give the floor to His Excellency, Ambassador Rodolfo Solano Quiroz, Minister of Foreign Affairs and Worship of Costa Rica. Please, Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you, Ambassador Flores, and good morning all from San Jose, Costa Rica. My dear friends, today is not only a special day. Today is a great day, but also is the beginning of a new era for all the humanity. We have the honor to bear witness to the day in which nuclear weapons are prohibited under international law. Costa Rica is pleased to join the celebration for the historic entry into force of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. This landmark instrument was negotiated and adopted in July 2017 during the presidency of Costa Rica of the United Nations Diplomatic Conference mandated by the General Assembly for said purpose. After more than 70 years, the United Nations settled the historic debt with the victims of nuclear weapons and took the brave step of filling the legal vacuum that existed, so that all weapons of mass destruction became prohibited under international law. This is a chapter that should have been written decades ago, stated His Excellency President Carlos Alvarado in 2018 as he addressed the UN General Assembly. My dear friends, furthermore, the year 2021 opens a decisive decade for global society to take urgent measures to resolve the two greatest existential risks that loom over the survival of the human race: nuclear weapons and climate change. And let me repeat, nuclear weapons and climate change, and to return to a path of sustainable development. History has proven that the possession and use of arms only provides a false sensation of security. In this 21st century, amidst a global socioeconomic and sanitary crisis, it seems unethical to divert financial resources to the modernization of nuclear arsenals. That's insane. Moreover, we must focus our investments in strengthening our healthcare and education systems, in tackling climate change, and in building more peaceful and sustainable societies for all. We are convinced that the only guarantee for nuclear weapons not to be used again under any circumstances is their total elimination. The entry into force of the treaty reinforces the political, normative, legal, ethical, and humanitarian imperative of nuclear disarmament, an aspiration and universal objective inherited from the 20th century and for which we are all obligated to take decisive steps today. Of nuclear weapons is not a sole responsibility of the possessing countries, but of the entire international community. Global disarmament must be achieved through dialogue, negotiation, the effective elimination of arsenals, and the exercise of permanent pressure from the citizens of the world. Costa Rica makes a strong call to the countries possessing nuclear arsenals to build a new security paradigm, one that does not put at risk the very existence of humanity and the planet, but is one that is compatible with human survival and dignity. Today, January 22nd, 2021, Costa Rica calls upon all of you to work tireless and not rest until we have freed the future generations from the nuclear nightmare. Similarly, we respectfully call upon those states that have not yet done so to sign and or ratify the treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons without delay. Thank you, all of you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Your Excellency, for your message and also for all the work your country has done to make the treaty happen. Now, we are pleased to present a video message by the UN Secretary General, Mr. Antonio Guterres. We particularly value that he could give us this message today, as we recognize that the treaty itself is an achievement of the organization which adopted on July 2017.
Weapons and the strong demonstration of support for multilateral approaches to nuclear disarmament. I commend the states that have ratified.
We will start again because we are having, as always, some technical difficulties, but now are part of our life. Can we play again the message, please?
Pleased to recognize today's entry into force of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, the first multilateral nuclear disarmament treaty in more than 2 decades. The treaty is an important step towards the goal of a world free of nuclear weapons and a strong demonstration of support for multilateral approaches to nuclear disarmament. I commend the states that have ratified the treaty and welcome the instrumental role of civil society in advancing negotiation and entry into force. The survivors of nuclear explosions and nuclear tests offered tragic testimonies and were a moral force behind the treaty. Entry into force is a tribute to their enduring advocacy. I look forward to carrying out the functions assigned by the treaty, including in preparation for the first meeting of states parties. Nuclear weapons pose growing dangers and the world needs urgent action to ensure their elimination and prevent the catastrophic human and environmental consequences any use would cause. The elimination of nuclear weapons remains the highest disarmament priority of the United Nations. I call on all states to work together to realize this ambition to advance common security and collective safety.
We appreciate very much the message of the Secretary General. And now we will listen to a video message by Peter Maurer, President of the International Committee of the Red Cross. As you all know, the ICRC undoubtedly has been a fundamental voice on the call for the prohibition of nuclear weapons since their first use in 1945, as their medical personnel experienced firsthand the catastrophic humanitarian effects of the use of a single nuclear weapon. Let's hear his message.
Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, today is the day we have been waiting for. From this day onwards, nuclear weapons, some of the most terrifying and inhumane weapons ever invented, are explicitly and comprehensively prohibited under international law. Future generations will look back at this day as the beginning of the end of the era of nuclear weapons, the day when our common humanity prevailed over these horrific means of catastrophic violence. I warmly thank the many states, civil society organizations, and individuals that have brought us to this moment. I congratulate the states that have joined the treaty so far and made its entry into force a reality. The International Committee of the Red Cross and the International Red Cross and Red Crescent Movement are proud to have contributed to this historic achievement. We are standing on the shoulders of giants, generations of nuclear weapon survivors, committed humanitarians, concerned medical practitioners, thoughtful citizens and visionary leaders who, through leadership and courageous action, demonstrated that by acting together, we can overcome even our biggest and most entrenched challenges. The Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons articulates the end state and benchmark against which all efforts towards nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation must now be judged. It sends a powerful signal that any use of nuclear weapons is unacceptable from a moral, humanitarian, and now also legal point of view. The treaty's entry into force offers a promise that one day we will be freed of the dark shadow cast by these indiscriminate and inhumane weapons. It is now up to us to deliver on this promise. While we celebrate the entry into force of this treaty, we must not forget that prohibiting nuclear weapons marks a new beginning and not the end of our efforts. There are still more than 13,000 nuclear weapons in the world. Several thousands of these are on high alert, ready to be launched at a moment's notice. The treaty will not by itself make these weapons disappear overnight. Our collective work is far from complete. We must therefore focus our attention forward. In the coming months, years and decades, we must intensify our efforts to promote adherence to the treaty and ensure that its provisions are faithfully implemented. This is the task currently at hand. In these efforts, we must strive to keep the testimonies of the Hibakusha and the evidence of the catastrophic humanitarian consequences at the center of the debate. We have a responsibility to speak out and lend our voice to those whose experiences are too often so conveniently neglected. The unspeakable suffering and devastation caused by the use of nuclear weapons and the threat they pose to the very survival of humanity remain the strongest arguments for their prohibition and elimination. It is for these reasons, as well as it is extremely doubtful that nuclear weapons could ever be used in accordance with international humanitarian law. Today is a victory for our common humanity. Let us seize the moment and take the treaty all the way to its goal, a world without nuclear weapons. I thank you.
Thank you very much, the ICRC, for this powerful message. And now, let me give the floor to our next speaker, Gaukar Muhatsjanova from the Vienna Center of Disarmament and Non-Proliferation. We cannot overstate the importance of the academia in the substantive work that led us towards the adoption of the TPNW and the importance of their guidance towards an effective and constructive implementation of the treaty. Please, Madam, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Good afternoon and greetings from Vienna. It is my honor and extreme pleasure to speak today on the occasion of the entry into force of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. I would like to congratulate the diplomats and civil society who worked so hard to make this a reality, and especially the Hibakusha, the survivors of atomic bombings, for whom this day had long been coming. At a time of heightened nuclear risks, a deep crisis in arms control, and the specter of a new nuclear arms race more real than it's been in decades, this is certainly a moment of hope and a moment of celebration. The TPNW is a product of the humanitarian initiative that sought to reframe the debate on nuclear weapons, shifting the focus away from strategic stability and traditional conception of state security to human security and the impact of nuclear weapons on individuals, communities, and the environment. The treaty is thus born of conviction that nuclear weapons are just too inhumane to be used against anyone under any circumstances. The TPNW is also the result of a movement among non-nuclear weapon states to reclaim their ownership of the issue, their rightful place in the debate. The humanitarian initiative helped demonstrate that we all have a stake in this, that the use of nuclear weapons anywhere can affect us all, and especially the least privileged among us. As such, it brought urgency to the discourse that had stagnated for much too long. The new treaty is now part of the international non-proliferation and disarmament regime. It reaffirms the norms against the pursuit and acquisition of nuclear weapons, against their testing, and against their use. And of course, it aims to establish a norm against the very possession of nuclear weapons by anyone without exception. As it builds on Article 6 of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty to advance nuclear disarmament, the TPNW challenges the status quo of the international regime, the narrative that most states have somehow come to tacitly accept nuclear weapons as a necessary evil, and that security of some states, and international stability in general requires wielding the overwhelmingly destructive power of these weapons. The treaty rejects nuclear deterrence as a legitimate practice. One might reasonably ask, how would the treaty work when those that possess nuclear weapons oppose it and vow never to join it? Well, states' interests and positions are not set in stone. They might be very difficult to change, but not impossible. Indeed, some of the states that once opposed the Non-Proliferation Treaty itself are now its staunch supporters. The legitimization of nuclear weapons and reassessment of what is acceptable as an instrument of security would not happen overnight, especially in societies where the trust in nuclear weapons as a source of safety might run deep. But for disarmament advocates everywhere, the TPNW can now be a rallying point, a clear demonstration that security policies involving potential use or threat of use of nuclear weapons are not acceptable. And as the number of parties to the treaty grows, so will its normative weight and impact. To be sure, the treaty will not draw in the nuclear armed states today, tomorrow, even for years ahead. But by virtue of challenging the legitimacy of continued possession of nuclear weapons, it will put pressure on the nuclear weapon states to act on their disarmament commitments, to implement the steps and actions negotiated in good faith in the context of the NPT. The TPNW is not a perfect instrument. While opening the door for nuclear armed states to join, it contains, by necessity, little detail on how the disarmament of weapons is to be accomplished and verified. In that sense, in particular, the treaty is a work in progress and would benefit from cooperation with various disarmament verification initiatives. The TPNW's interaction and relationship with other mechanisms, such as the International Atomic Energy Agency and the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty Organization, will also need to develop in coming years. Sure, there is much work ahead for states and civil society as they prepare for the first meeting of states parties of the TPNW, but it is a great work to do, and I wish them every success. Congratulations once again, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Gauka, for your comments and for reminding us of, as was also said by the ICRC, that this is just the beginning of another journey, and we will be doing a lot of work, and we will continue together. Our next speaker is Beatriz Fin, Director of the International Campaign to Ban Nuclear Weapons. Beatriz, it is a pleasure to have you with us today and to take advantage of the opportunity to thank you and your team for all the work that you are doing. As the Nobel Committee expressed on the motivation of the Peace Prize in 2017, we cannot underscore the importance of its work to draw attention to the catastrophic humanitarian consequences of any use of nuclear weapons and for its groundbreaking efforts to achieve a treaty-based prohibition of such weapons. So, Beatriz, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Florence. Excellencies, colleagues, friends, it's such a pleasure to be here with you all today. As we really reach a major milestone on the road to a more peaceful and secure world, free from the ultimate menace of nuclear war. Ever since the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, citizens around the world have petitioned and protested for a permanent ban on nuclear weapons. And that ban, long imagined, long sought, is now finally enforced. And for the first time, the worst weapon of mass destruction, weapons so horrific that they threaten the very survival of humanity, are subject to a comprehensive global prohibition. And for the first time, a multilateral legal framework exists to eliminate nuclear weapons program verifiably and irreversibly. And for the first time, an international system is in place to assist victims of the use and testing of nuclear weapons and to remediate contaminated environments. The treaty is really a monumental accomplishment, and I really, from the bottom of my heart, want to thank everyone who's contributed to its creation. From the activists and concerned citizens to the diplomats, the UN officials and Red Cross humanitarians, but maybe most of all, the Hibakusha. We really all owe a debt of gratitude to the survivors of nuclear war who have courageously and painfully many times spoken out time and time again to save humanity from itself. And I know that some will seek to downplay the historical significance of this moment, and particularly those intent on preserving the status quo, who feel strong wielding these instruments of mass murder, or those who profit from their production. But really, their voices are soft whimpers amid the loud chorus of support for this crucial new piece of international law. And I just want to say on behalf of ICANN to all the states that have already ratified the treaty, thank you. Thank you for your leadership and your courage and your vision. And you have made your history here today, and you're laying the foundations for a better tomorrow. And to all the supportive states that have not yet ratified, please act swiftly. Each ratification really matters. It entrenches the treaty norms and it makes it effective in achieving its goals. And to all the states that endorse and offer practical support for their allies' nuclear weapons, stop. You're aiding and abetting the retention and potential use of illegal weapons of mass destruction. And your willful accomplices in a joint criminal enterprise that's endangering our planet. And to the nuclear armed states, we really have one message here today. Your weapons are now banned permanently. And you are on the wrong side of international law, the wrong side of history, and the wrong side of humanity. It is really time to consign your awful bombs to the dustbin of history. And you will be celebrated for it. And maybe even wonder why you didn't do it sooner. And we will continue to campaign until all countries have joined this treaty and until all nuclear weapons are eliminated. And that is the promise that we make for you here today. So thank you all.
Thank you very much, Beatrice, and we look forward working with you and your team in the next phases. And you have mentioned the hibakushas, and let me now share with you a very special video message given by Satsuko Turlo, a member of the family of the hibakusha. Those who miraculously survived the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and that have been tirelessly working for the abolition of nuclear weapons for more than 7 decades. Let's hear her message.
It's a great pleasure to have this opportunity to be speaking to you. I prepared a few remarks, so let me share that with you. The Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons has entered into force today, January 22nd, 2021. This truly marks the beginning of the end of the nuclear weapons. Many Hiroshima and Nagasaki survivors have the motto, abolition in our lifetime. Can you imagine? I survived the atomic bombing in Hiroshima and have lived to see this day. As a 13-year-old girl, I witnessed my beloved hometown, Hiroshima, blinded by the flash, flattened by the blast, and burned in the heat of 4,000 degrees Celsius, and contaminated by the radiation of one atomic bomb. A bright summer morning turned into dark twilight with smoke and debris rising in the mushroom cloud. I saw a mass of grotesque, ghostly figures, bleeding, burned, blackened, and swollen. From one moment to the next, my beloved Hiroshima was transformed into a hell on earth. Having survived such a massive trauma, I made the vow to commit my life to the abolition of nuclear weapons. It is impossible to describe the depth of my joy that we have finally achieved the status of international law for the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. It is impossible to describe the depth of my gratitude to everyone who has contributed to its success. When I learned that we have reached our 50th ratification, I was so overcome with emotion that I was unable to stand. I remained in my chair and put my head in my hands, and I cried with tears of joy. As I sat down, I found myself speaking with the spirits of hundreds of thousands of people who lost their lives in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And I thought again about the profound meaning that each person who died had a name. Each person was loved by someone. On behalf of all those who perished in the indiscriminate massacre of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and all those victimized by more than 2,000 nuclear tests across the globe, and countless indigenous people exploited for uranium mining in isolated areas of the world. For all those people, I say from the bottom of my heart, thank you to everyone who worked and who has recognized us, the survivors of radioactive violence, no longer to be forgotten and ignored. We are publicly acknowledged and assisted through the positive obligations enshrined in the treaty. Today is a day to celebrate with the global community of nuclear abolitionists who have come together, nearly 600 organizations in more than 100 countries, who have received public recognition of the Nobel Peace Prize. Indeed, it is ICANN that laid the groundwork to collaborate across the divide of diplomacy and activism to achieve something of profound and lasting importance. Through my work over the years with ICANN, I have a powerful feeling of solidarity with tens of thousands of people around the world. We have made it to this point. During the years of working together for a shared goal, we have developed respect, trust, and inclusiveness among government representatives, delegates from international agencies, scholars and experts, and civil society activists. This is a remarkable demonstration of our deeply cherished commitment to creation of a world without nuclear weapons. We must continue to do that and redouble our efforts to work in true collaboration with one another. I clearly remember the moment the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons was adopted in July 2017. And likewise, the day the 50th ratification by Honduras was achieved. And now, this morning, when the treaty finally entered into force, I again found myself reporting to the spirits of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. I reported to them that we finally achieved the milestone of entry into force, the first step on a path ever forward to the final goal of nuclear abolition. Watch over us, I ask them. Give us time for us to achieve the total elimination of nuclear weapons, as we have vowed so many years ago. Today, as we celebrate, let us embrace in our warm circle the memories of those who perished and of those currently suffering radioactive harm in many parts of the world. It is on their behalf and for our future generations that our urgent work continues. Thank you, and thank you again from the bottom of my heart.
Thank you. Thank you. And with this very emotional and powerful testimony, we conclude the first part of our meeting. Now we would turn to the next one of this virtual commemoration, where we are going to listen from UN member states about on their views about the TPNW, what it represents for nuclear disarmament. They will share their views on the efforts that are coming in the future. So we want to remind participants to keep their intervention to 3 minutes so we can hear to as many as possible. And let me first give the floor to the video message of His Excellency Don Pramudwinai, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Kingdom of Thailand.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm honored to be with you today at this historic commemorative event of the entry into force of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, TPNW. Today, 22nd January 2021, marks a significant milestone for the global nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation agenda. Our collective efforts have given hope and helped build up fresh momentum for the global campaign towards the total elimination of nuclear weapons. Our achievement represents a triumph of multilateralism. Therefore, it's indeed a cause for celebration. On this historic occasion, it's worth reminding ourselves of the commitments made in the UN Charter of our determination to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war. This was reinforced by the very first UNGA resolution in 1946 on the establishment of a commission to deal with the problems raised by the discovery of atomic energy at tremendous risk from nuclear weapons. As political tensions between the leading powers rise, nuclear-armed states continue to modernize their arsenals, regardless of the so-called justifications for the use of nuclear weapons. Their continued existence may increase the sense of security for a few, but is truly harmful to the collective security of all. In our view, nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation is a global issue, requiring all states to create and maintain an atmosphere of collective trust to promote concerted actions towards one collective goal, the total elimination of the weapons. On Thailand's part, being one of the first countries to sign and ratify the TPNW and the depository state for the Southeast Asian Nuclear Weapon Free Zone Treaty, or Bangkok Treaty, Thailand is committed to the full and effective implementation of these key treaties. Going forward, we need to do more to promote further ratification and accession to the TPNW. Our future efforts have to be inclusive and universally mobilized. A task ahead requires strengthened partnership among governments, relevant international organizations, academia, civil society, and global citizens. In particular, We must encourage effective youth participation, as young people should play a key role in shaping the nuclear-free future that they want. There's also the need for constructive dialogue within the international community outside the framework of the treaty. We have to look for an effective approach to introduce a paradigm shift that puts the mutual interests of humankind and international peace and security at its core. I wish, therefore, to reiterate Thailand's unwavering commitment to the universal application of the TPNW. Thailand will continue to play a constructive role and work with all parties toward the goal of nuclear weapon-free world. We look forward to participating actively in the first meeting of the state parties to the treaty. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. And now we will listen another video message from His Excellency Evaris Bartolo, Minister of Foreign Affairs and European Affairs of the Republic of Malta.
It is an honor and a privilege to join all of you like-minded states for this commemoration as we make a major step forward towards our goal of global nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation. We stand together today due to our shared deep concern at the unique existential threat that nuclear weapons pose to humanity and the lack of recent progress towards their elimination. Indeed, I congratulate all our friends who have joined us in sending a strong political message. The 50 ratifications resulting in the treaty's entry into force underscore our unwavering commitment towards nuclear non-proliferation and highlight our determination towards achieving prosperity through peace. According to the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, the worldwide total inventory of nuclear weapons as of 2019 stood at 13,865, of which 3,750 were deployed with operational forces. In early 2019, more than 90% of the world's total nuclear weapons were owned by Russia and the United States. It should be recalled that by the end of 1945, the atomic bombings of Japan had killed an estimated 140,000 people at Hiroshima and 74,000 people at Nagasaki, including those who died from radiation poisoning. Within the first few months after the bombings, it is estimated by the Radiation Effects Research Foundation, a cooperative Japan-US organization, between 90,000 and 166,000 people died in Hiroshima, while another 60,000 to 80,000 died in Nagasaki. Often lost in those numbers are the experience of the survivors known as hibakusha, literally atomic bomb-affected people. 75 years later, nuclear weapons still kill. There have been another 250,000 suffering from radiation-induced cancers in Japan. Thousands of workers who got sick with cancer involved in nuclear weapons production. Other casualties of nuclear weapon accidents. 2.5 million persons victims of nuclear weapons testing. Looking at these numbers in the middle of a pandemic and while facing a climate emergency, that instead of mobilizing our resources to save the planet, countries are still investing in their nuclear arsenals. This is not an abstract pacifist principle and wishful thinking. It is our own survival. By the early 1960s, there was no place on Earth where the signature of atmospheric nuclear testing could not be found in soil, water, and even polar ice. Today, with heightened fears about the possibilities of nuclear terrorism, it is worthwhile to recall the science of what we know about exposure to fallout and its associated cancer risk. This is why, in my view, through our collective actions, through this treaty, we are also conveying a message of hope in light of the recent major setbacks in disarmament diplomacy, where we have seen the worrying erosion of major disarmament architecture. In such dire times, where we have witnessed tensions only parallel during the Cold War period, the need for multilateral efforts towards nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation has never been greater. The signs are there that more promising times are upon us. and we should grasp this opportunity with both hands. The benefits of this treaty are diverse. The Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons is the culmination of a decade-long initiative resulting in the first comprehensive global prohibition on the very worst weapons of mass destruction. The treaty serves to fill a legal gap in the global nuclear non-proliferation regime, since treaties which have come before it did not expressly outlaw nuclear weapons. Through our respective signatures and ratifications, we have also strengthened the international legal structure and political norms against nuclear weapons, possession and use, further legitimizing nuclear weapons as instruments of power, terror, and intimidation. We stand as states parties to the treaty, keeping in mind that no state, big or small, possessing nuclear capabilities or not, is immune from the array of humanitarian consequences that would transcend national borders if these weapons were to be deployed again. No state is immune to the climate disruption, agriculture and economic collapse, mass human displacement, and famine that would inevitably follow even a so-called limited nuclear war. In this manner, the existence of nuclear weapons are a major source of anxiety and insecurity for all countries alike. The entry into force of this treaty comes as a victory for the preservation of international humanitarian law. This is also reflected through the treaty's aspects of environmental remediation and victim assistance. While this is a notable achievement, our efforts should not stop here, as we still find ourselves at a critical juncture. Ensuring the success of the treaty is now our collective responsibility. It is our duty to promote the benefits of such a treaty, help fight misconceptions about it, and ensure that its obligations are adhered to. Moving forward, the entry into force of the treaty has the potential to stimulate further action on disarmament and take us closer to a world without nuclear weapons. As states seeking prosperity through peace, we should aim to capitalize on such momentum. In so doing, we can build together a safer, more peaceful and prosperous future for humanity. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now we will hear the message of His Excellency, Mr. Riyad Malki, Minister of Foreign Affairs of the State of Palestine.
We are grateful to all where we celebrate the entry into force of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. Our first thoughts go to the Hibakusha and to the victims of nuclear testing. 75 years ago, civilian inhabitants of Hiroshima and Nagasaki became the first victims of an attack by atomic bombs, which killed hundreds of thousands of people and left many more to live with the injuries sustained during the attack or as a result of its fallout. This is an eternal scare on humanity's conscience, and there is no doubt that these actions amount to war crimes and crimes against humanity. We have yet to answer the appeals of the survivors to put an end to this threat once and for all. 75 years after these attacks, and 50 years after the entry into force of the NPT, the objective of total elimination of nuclear weapons has not been fulfilled. May this treaty be the founding stone for the achievement of this objective. The State of Palestine reiterates that the use of nuclear weapons by whomever, wherever, and for whatever purposes is morally and legally unjustifiable, as it is incompatible in all times and under all circumstances with the rules of international law. The use or threat of use of nuclear weapons constitutes the gravest possible breach to the foundational principles of international humanitarian law, including the cardinal principles of humanity and distinction. It is necessarily entails the commission of war crimes and crimes against humanity, given the indiscriminate short-term and long-term effects of these weapons. We therefore call for their immediate, complete, irreversible, and internationally verifiable elimination. The exceptional status enjoyed by nuclear weapons compared to other weapons of mass destruction can no longer be justified, nor can the NPT or its indefinite extension be interpreted as allowing indefinite possession of nuclear weapons. Nuclear disarmament is one of the three pillars of the NPT, and we reject the interpretation of this treaty as giving legitimacy in any way to the possession of nuclear weapons. The State of Palestine is thus proud to have participated in the elaboration of the historic treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons, and to have been among the first to ratify it, having thus joined all conventions prohibiting weapons of mass destruction. We continue to call for a Middle East free of nuclear weapons and all weapons of mass destruction, and regret that a single country which has illegally acquired nuclear weapons continues to hamper such a prospect. We are grateful to all states which have ratified the treaty and given the large support expressed by 2/3 of the countries of the world for the treaty. We hope many more will follow. We are also grateful for the relentless efforts of survivors, men and women of conscience and of civil society organizations, including ICANN, that helped bring this day into being. For those who explain to us that nuclear weapons constitute a guarantee for international peace and security, we tell them they are the greatest threat. The first resolution adopted by the United Nations called for nuclear disarmament, as the nuclear race represented then as it represents now, the single greatest existential threat to humanity. Men have developed the instruments of their own extinction. They must get rid of them before it's too late. The fate of humankind and of our planet and all the life it inhabits rest on our resolve and reason. May they prevail.
Thank you very much. Now we will listen the message of His Excellency Luis Gallegos, Minister of Foreign Affairs and Human Mobility of Ecuador.
Contrary to the principles of the international. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me first to thank the permanent mission organizing this virtual commemorative meeting on the occasion of the entry into force of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. The objectives that we have set ourselves during the negotiations of the treaty were important and ambitious, including on the entry into force. The adoption of the treaty already marked a before and after in nuclear disarmament efforts and international law. With the same strength, this instrument has entered into force today in the midst of a central moment for humanity. I would like to highlight the fundamental role of our civil society. Nuclear weapons are contrary to the principles of international humanitarian law and human rights law. With the entry into force, we are celebrating today finally those weapons are prohibited by a legally binding universal instrument. We also invite countries that have not yet done so to sign and ratify the treaty. And we further reject the pretext by which, according to some, this instrument would weaken the Non-Proliferation Treaty, NPT, whose review conference we are about to hold next August. On the contrary, Ecuador and the TPNW not only complement the NTP, but are fully in line with the Article 6 and therefore favors its effective implementation. The COVID-19 pandemic highlighted the fragility and vulnerability of the human being and our planet. It also showed that humanity's survival depends on how prepared we are in the global health rather than how armed we are. In the context, the spending on nuclear weapons maintenance for 1 year stands in contrast to 30-year budget of the World Health Organization. Last year, we commemorated the 75th anniversary of the UN, but also of the first use of nuclear weapons against Hiroshima and Nagasaki. That is why this entry into force pays tribute to the Hibakusha, the dead and the survivors of the atomic attacks, and all the victims of nuclear tests around the world. In this regard, I also wish to insist on the need for an early entry into force of the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, for which I reiterate Ecuador's call for the states that have not done so, especially those in Annex 2, to sign and ratify as soon as possible. Now is the time to redouble our efforts to achieve the goal of the world free of nuclear weapons in front of honor and catastrophic humanitarian impact of nuclear weapons. Ecuador reiterates the commitment to continue promoting the elimination of the same conviction with the same conviction as 75 years ago, when on 26 January 1946, the first resolution formally presented to the plenary of the United Nations General Assembly by the Ecuadorian diplomat Homero Viteri Lafronte called for the elimination of, and I quote, atomic weapons from national armaments. Closing quotes. I thank you very much and wish the world to be free of nuclear weapons. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. And now I have the honor of giving the floor to His Excellency Alvin Bolte, Deputy Minister of International Relations and Cooperation of South Africa. Sir, you have the floor.
Chairperson, Excellencies and distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor and great pleasure to address you today on this momentous occasion and to, on behalf of the government and the people of South Africa, register our unwavering support for the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. Firstly, I would like to express my government's appreciation to all countries that have ensured that the treaty is ratified by the requisite number for its entry into force, and to all the signatory states. We take this opportunity as South Africa to urge all states that have not done so, including and in particular the nuclear weapon states, to ratify this treaty without further delay. There is no rationale, Madam Chairperson, for possessing nuclear weapons, and we must endeavor to get rid of them. Secondly, we wish to thank civil society and in particular the international campaign to abolish nuclear weapons for working so relentlessly with countries to ensure that this treaty is negotiated, adopted, and ratified. South Africa's struggle for political freedom was closely linked to nuclear disarmament, and as the first country to have eliminated our nuclear weapons, we are proud to have played a role in the finalization of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, together with the members of the core group. The adoption of the TPNW by the vast majority of states in July 2017 reflects the majority's commitment to achieve a world free from the threat of nuclear weapons and to ensure that nuclear energy is used for peaceful purposes only. The treaty therefore seeks to achieve the objective of the UN General Assembly's first resolution adopted in 1946 to eliminate all weapons of mass destruction. Chairperson, with these brief remarks, I would like to applaud this day and our efforts as a clear demonstration of our collective and unwavering commitment towards a world that is free from the threat posed by nuclear weapons, and we look as South Africa forward to even more states ratifying the treaty in furthering of this common objective. The entry into force of the TPNW is a fitting tribute to the remarks of our late and first democratic president of South Africa, Your Excellency Nelson Mandela, in his last address to the General Assembly in 1998, when he said, and I quote, "We must ask the question which might sound naive to those who have elaborated sophisticated arguments to justify their refusal to eliminate these terrible and terrifying weapons of mass destruction. Why do they need them anyway, unquote. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Excellency, also for reminding us such strong words by the great Mr. Mandela. Now, our next speaker is His Excellency Ambassador Michael Gaffney, Permanent Representative of Ireland to the United Nations and other international organizations in Geneva. Sir, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. I am really honored to participate in this event to celebrate the entry into force of the TPNW. The treaty is an historic global achievement, and its entry into force marks a new beginning in our joint efforts to achieve global nuclear disarmament. We should not underestimate the significance of this occasion. For the first time in history, nuclear weapons are explicitly prohibited under international law. The treaty is new, but it is deeply rooted in decades of work by states, international organizations, the ICRC, civil society, academics, youth organizations, and perhaps most powerfully, the activism of the Hibakusha and the survivors of nuclear weapons use and testing. From the text of the very first UN General Assembly resolution to ensure the elimination from national armaments of atomic weapons and all other major weapons adaptable to mass destruction, to the establishment of nuclear weapon-free zones around the globe, to the disarmament action plans developed in the framework of the NPT, the TPNW represents the next logical step towards the total eradication of nuclear weapons. Like many of those championing the treaty, Ireland's long history of support for nuclear disarmament is based on our belief that nuclear weapons pose a fundamental danger to our planet and our collective security, and on the totally unacceptable humanitarian consequences a nuclear war would cause. These include the disproportionate impact on the health of women and girls of ionizing radiation. Some continue to argue that the deteriorating international security environment means that progress on disarmament cannot be made. But this is a dangerous mindset, an inverted logic. For Ireland, multilateral disarmament is not a luxury that can wait. We must proactively work for it. The TPNW is a manifestation of that collective will to make progress on multilateral nuclear disarmament. It offers us a path to a nuclear weapon-free world by finally putting in place a workable legal framework for the total elimination of nuclear weapons. There is no doubt that it is fully compatible with the NPT. It gives the NPT a much-needed impetus on nuclear disarmament and highlights the urgent need to make progress. Our firmly held view is that the best way to protect the NPT is to implement it. The TPNW allows us to do exactly that by filling the legal gap that exists in the NPT's disarmament provisions. On the existing disarmament and non-proliferation regime, the TPNW is practical, it is entirely complementary, and as of today, it is a reality. In a year of great suffering, the treaty's entry into force is a welcome piece of good news. The COVID pandemic has been a stark reminder that risks can quickly become reality, and with devastating global effects. It is clear that investment in weapons of mass destruction does not afford us security, and we know that we will never have the capacity to deal with a nuclear weapons detonation, whether by accident, miscalculation, or design. Our safety can only be guaranteed with the complete elimination of nuclear weapons. Today, we celebrate the momentous step we've taken towards that goal, and rightly so. But we should also remember that today marks the beginning of a new, challenging chapter of implementation and universalization. We have a shared responsibility to ensure that the promise of the TPNW is fully realized, and that the elation we feel today drives our work towards the achievement of our objectives. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Gaffney, for your message. And now we will listen to Her Excellency Caroline Rodriguez Birkett, Permanent to the United Nations. Madam, you have the floor. We have Ms.
Celebrate this occasion with our regional and international partners. Many of you present today have worked so hard over many years to turn the dream of this treaty into a reality. The entry into force of our treaty today is a very significant step towards achieving the total elimination of these weapons of mass destruction. And it will also serve to diminish the risk of the catastrophic humanitarian consequences with which nuclear weapons are associated. Today, several events have been held in New Zealand commemorating the entry of the treaty into force. These include an event convened by our national branch of the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, as well as celebrations hosted by other civil society groups that have long championed nuclear disarmament. Our Minister for Disarmament and Arms Control also hosted a reception earlier today at which he paid tribute to all of the activists, academics, religious leaders, politicians, and government officials who have never lost faith in the promise of a world without nuclear weapons and who have now achieved their legal prohibition. Of course, it is abundantly clear that our efforts to achieve nuclear disarmament are far from over. Yet, it is fitting that we pause to celebrate the significant milestone that the entry into force of this treaty represents. Our treaty demonstrates that activism and multilateralism are necessary and effective tools in creating a better world. In New Zealand, people often say that nuclear disarmament is in our DNA. It was therefore with the strong support of our public and our government that we played an active part in bringing this treaty to life. In the company of so many of our Pacific Island partners, we cherish the fact that we were among the first 50 ratifiers that have secured the treaty's entry into force. For New Zealand, joining the treaty required no change to our national legislation. All nuclear weapons and explosive devices have been illegal under our domestic law since 1987. We are also fortunate to live within a nuclear weapon-free zone, thanks to the Treaty of Rarotonga. We do wish to acknowledge that for some states, joining the TPNW is or has not been quite so straightforward. So New Zealand stands ready to do whatever we can to support you in joining our treaty and broadening the impact of its prohibition against nuclear weapons. In New Zealand's Indigenous language, we say, He waka eka noa. We are all in this together. And I thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ambassador, for your message. And now let me give the floor to our next speaker, Her Excellency Silvia Alfaro Espinosa, Permanent Representative of Peru to the United Nations Office and other international organizations in Geneva. Madam, you have the floor.
Thank you, Excellency Ambassador Flores. Do you hear me? Hello?
We can hear you.
Yes, we hear you very well. Yes.
Thank you, Ambassador Flores. Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, today is a special day for the international community. I am honored to participate in this important celebration, and on behalf of the government of Peru, I wish to congratulate the states, the International Committee of the Red Cross, the civil society, particularly the International Campaign for the Abolition of Nuclear Weapons, on the entry into force of the Treaty of the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, the TPNW. In this historic moment today, a new legally binding instrument joins up the international disarmament and non-proliferation architecture. From now onwards, nuclear weapons are explicitly and comprehensively prohibited worldwide. The TPNW brings the world closer to the elimination of nuclear weapons. The existence of nuclear weapons is a threat to mankind's survival. The explosion of a nuclear weapon releases energy capable of killing massive numbers of innocent people, destroying civil infrastructure and severely damaging the environment. Thus, its use or threat of use constitute a crime against humanity and a violation of international law, including international humanitarian law. The testimony we just heard from Madame Setsuko Turlo in representation of Hibakusha is a clear and terrible example of this. Despite this catastrophic potential, it is worrisome that there are still tens of thousands of nuclear weapons around the world. And in a context of worsening geopolitics, reinvigoration of arsenals modernization programs and the prevalence of nuclear deterrence policy. The TPNW enters into force to contribute to the shared goal of a world free of nuclear weapons. The TPNW is fully compatible with the existing international framework, particularly with the Treaty of the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, the NPT, and its Article 6 implementation. This is especially important to say today. The TPNW strengthens the NPT, which is still recognized as the cornerstone of the global non-proliferation and disarmament regime. Peru is one of the first states to have signed the TPNW. I wish to inform that my country is making all efforts to complete domestic procedures for its swift ratification. In closing, I warmly congratulate you all once again for having brought us to this point where the TPNW is becoming a reality to ensure an irreversible, verifiable, and transparent elimination of nuclear weapons. Hence, it will play a vital role in promoting international peace and security. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, and thank you also for the good news. Now we will listen to the message from His Excellency, Mr. Syed Hasrin Aidid, Permanent Representative of Malaysia to the UN in Europe.
Ambassador, sorry to interrupt you, but Malaysia has sent us a video message from His Excellency Dr. Ahmed Faisal Muhammad instead, which I will play.
Yes, go ahead.
At the outset, Malaysia thanks the country organizers for convening this virtual commemoration of the entry into force of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, TPNW. Malaysia is proud to be part of this historic milestone, together with 50 other state parties to the treaty, in leading towards a world free of the threat of nuclear weapons. On this momentous occasion, Malaysia wishes to reiterate our belief that the TPNW is legally sound, feasible to implement, and will create the necessary legal norm that render nuclear weapons categorically unacceptable. Now that the treaty has entered into force, we hope that the global norms against nuclear weapons will be further strengthened and change the nuclear disarmament discourse from one dominated by the nuclear weapons and nuclear-armed states to one which is more democratic, equitable, and where all states have an equal voice. Malaysia is committed to adopt the necessary measures to implement the obligations under the TPNW and will work closely with all partners so that the strong global momentum towards nuclear disarmament will endure. Malaysia calls on all states to ratify the TPNW at the earliest opportunity. We also encourage nuclear weapons and nuclear-armed states to recognize that the continued existence of nuclear weapons is a risk to all countries, and that the elimination of these weapons is absolutely vital for our collective security. Malaysia reaffirms its resolute commitment towards nuclear disarmament and will continue to work closely with partners to realize the long overdue goal of a world free of the threat of nuclear weapons. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Malaysia. Now it is my pleasure to give the floor to His Excellency, Mr. Courtenay Radfry, Permanent Representative of Jamaica to the UN. Sir, you have the floor.
Thank you, Ambassador Flores. Excellencies, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. What a historic day. Jamaica is absolutely delighted to be a part of this momentous occasion. 75 years after the humanitarian and environmental catastrophe caused by the use of nuclear weapons, we are finally witnessing the entry into force of the first legally binding international agreement to comprehensively prohibit these devastating weapons. As one of the 50 states that has made this occasion possible, we continue to call for the universal acceptance of this treaty and the complete elimination of nuclear weapons and the strengthening of the legal and political norms against its use. We commend the more than 130 member states that contributed to the successful negotiation of the treaty and the 122 states that voted for its adoption in 2017. Furthermore, we recognize the work undertaken by the UN Office for Disarmament Affairs in support of multilateral efforts to eliminate nuclear weapons, given their destructive nature and the threat they pose to humanity. We acknowledge, in addition, the vital role played by academia, hibakusha, and civil society organizations, which campaigned resolutely to ensure that these inhumane and indiscriminate weapons are declared illegal under international law. We are, however, mindful that the entry into force of the TPNW signifies only the beginning of our mission towards the total elimination of nuclear weapons, as states parties will now be required to implement their obligations and abide by its prohibitions. This includes encouraging others to join the treaty. As ardent supporters of the treaty, we continue to call upon nuclear-armed states to engage in nuclear disarmament in good faith. Small island developing states such as ours view the prospect of a nuclear detonation, whether by design, accident, or negligence, as an existential threat that could decimate entire regions such as the Caribbean. The international community, therefore, has a moral obligation to abolish nuclear arsenals before they are used once more against the people of the world. Jamaica stands together with all states parties to this treaty in support of the global goal of a world that is peaceful, secure, and habitable for present and future generations. To echo the words of our foreign minister, let me close by stating that nuclear weapons has no role in the future we need. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ambassador, for your message. Now, let me give the floor to another of the co-sponsors of this event, His Excellency, Mr. Tijani Mohammad Bande, Permanent Representative of Nigeria to the United Nations. Sir, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, our sister, Your Excellency, the co-host. Excellencies, let me begin by wishing you a Happy New Year and also congratulate you all as members of the United Nations General Assembly, as well as the core group of states who, along with Nigeria, undertook the robust negotiations in 2017 that culminated in the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, TPNW, which today, 22nd January 2021, we witness. It's a historic entry into force of a treaty with tremendous implications for international security. Excellencies, we all are witnesses to the anxiety provoked by nuclear arms race in a divided world. It's a well-founded anxiety arising from knowledge of what death and devastation the first use of such weapons have caused. We have just listened to a survivor reminding us of the death and the devastation she witnessed. She has done her duty, as have other survivors. Others, civil society organizations and academia have also done their duty to remind us of the necessity to get to this day in our effort to ban use of nuclear weapons. Rather than prevent aggression, nuclear weapons foster the propensity of nations to provoke global tension at a higher cost to lives and property. Till this moment, the world is yet to recover from the human and environmental devastation unleashed by nuclear weapons over 75 years ago in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It is therefore sad to see that despite the devastation witnessed over the years, some countries have continued to increase their investment in nuclear weaponry, which has added to the astronomical rise in the general expenditure on military weapons. In the last decade, for example, global military spending was at its highest in 2019. Meanwhile, from experience, we have also seen that increase in weapons also leads to increase in the loss of life and biodiversity. This frightening situation should compel every nation to sign and ratify a treaty that prohibits nuclear weapons because they do us no good. On the contrary, they threaten our very existence. Excellencies, Nigeria, like many other African countries, have long acknowledged the existential threat posed by nuclear tests, and have collectively undertaken a commitment through the Pelindaba Treaty to renounce the use of nuclear weapons for military purposes. Hence, Africa has declared itself a nuclear weapons free zone and urges other regions to do the same. Excellencies, Nigeria celebrates the coming into force of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons at the campus that will effectively shepherd the world to a nuclear weapons-free era. We are encouraged by the fact that the treaty, which is a multilateral one, is really has come into force at a point of fragility, both in trust and security. It is therefore well timed that today, since COVID, we are witnessing something really major to give us hope for a more secure world. My delegation also believes that nuclear weapons should end with the circumstances that led to their invention in the first place. We therefore welcome the TPNW as the template that prepares the world for the next phase of international cooperation and development. We must therefore uphold and promote adherence to all enabling nuclear disarmament commitments. To this end, Excellencies, my delegation congratulates all the 132 states that supported the enactment of this treaty. Your votes have made this day possible. Together, we have provided a protective shield for all vulnerable populations, including the farthest behind. Nigeria calls on all supporters of the treaty to give it life by ratifying and demonstrating it in their respective countries. Excellencies, in this vein, my delegation calls on countries that are yet to lend support to this historic treaty to keep their doors open for further engagement. Hence, my delegation is confident that eventually all member states will come to the realization that nuclear weapons do not serve any good purpose for humanity and would become parties to this landmark treaty. As a signatory with domestic ratification of the treaty, Nigeria will wholly support and abide by the provisions of the TPNW in line with the United Nations Charter on International Peace and Security. We view today's historic event as a demonstration of the power of multilateralism and the beginning of a new nuclear-free world with unimaginable benefits for the next generation, not least of which is a just world that safeguards the sanctity of life for peace and development. I thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ambassador, for your message. Colleagues, we are approaching the 3:30, and we still have some speakers, so I beg your indulgence to remain with us for some minutes more so we can hear the statements, and I invite speakers to keep the 3 minutes time limit. And now I give the floor to our next speaker, Her Excellency, Ms. Rabab Fatima, Permanent Representative of Bangladesh to the UN in New York. Madam, you have the floor. Please go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Ambassador. Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, I'm truly honored and delighted to join other states parties for this historic event to celebrate the entry into force of the landmark treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons. On this auspicious occasion, I warmly congratulate all the countries that have ratified this landmark treaty. The entry into force of the treaty brings to an end our long wait of 75 years for a world free of nuclear weapons. Today, nuclear weapons finally joins the ranks of other prohibited weapons of mass destruction under international law. I pay tribute to the generations of activists and civil society organizations who have tirelessly raised awareness about the humanitarian impact of nuclear weapons since the bombings of August 1945. This treaty is our tribute to the hibakushas, the victims and survivors of those bombings. Excellencies, general and complete disarmament is a constitutional commitment for Bangladesh. Our founding father, Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, in his maiden speech at the UN General Assembly in 1974, made a clarion call to free the world from the scourges of nuclear war. That forms the cornerstone of Bangladesh's total and unwavering commitment and adherence to nuclear disarmament. We firmly believe that the ultimate guarantee of international peace and security lies in the total elimination of nuclear weapons. It was from that conviction that we ratified this treaty, and we remain committed to seeing to its full implementation. For the total abolition of nuclear weapons, the international community must recognize the dehumanizing and devastating consequences of nuclear weapons. Towards that end, we call upon states that are yet to join to do so to attain universal application of this treaty. We call upon the nuclear weapon states to take immediate and concrete steps to seize the nuclear arms race and take stringent measures to avoid the risk of nuclear weapons falling into the hands of terrorists or other unauthorized actors. We call for increased investment in research of nuclear technology and explore the potentials of the peaceful use of nuclear energy for the benefit of mankind. Excellencies, dear colleagues, our work is far from over. We must continue to step up our efforts towards the goal of a peaceful and nuclear weapons-free world. Bangladesh stands ready to play its part towards that goal. I thank you, Excellency. I thank you, colleagues.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for your message. I've been told that now we have with us Her Excellency Caroline Rodriguez Birquet, Permanent Representative of Guyana. I will give her the floor now, followed by our colleague from Chile, Ambassador Tressler. Please, Ambassador Rodriguez Birquet, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. My apologies for the earlier mix-up. I thank you all for your efforts in convening this historic meeting to commemorate the entry into force of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. Guyana welcomes this opportunity to celebrate this watershed moment in our quest to realize a nuclear weapon-free world. Almost 75 years ago, on 24th of January 1946, the United Nations General Assembly, by its very first resolution, sought to establish a commission to ensure, and I quote, elimination from national armaments of atomic weapons and all other major weapons adaptable to mass destruction. The entry into force of the TPNW today, therefore, represents a significant milestone in achieving the objectives set out by that resolution. The importance of today's milestone, therefore, cannot be overstated. The TPNW represents the first legally binding international agreement to comprehensively prohibit, among other things, the development, testing, manufacturing, production, acquisition, possession, stockpiling, use or threat of use of nuclear weapons under any circumstances. Its adoption on 7th July 2017 conclusively closed the legal gap which previously existed in the international disarmament regime. Recognizing the significance of the treaty, Madam Chair, Guyana is proud to have been the first member state to sign and ratify the treaty. Our decision to both sign and ratify the treaty was rooted in our firm conviction that the total elimination of nuclear weapons is dependent not just on our words, but more importantly, on our actions in fulfillment of our common obligation to work for the maintenance of international peace and security. As a non-nuclear weapon state, Guyana's ratification of the treaty was a demonstration that the continued existence of nuclear weapons requires action by all of us, given the indiscriminate and unparalleled destruction that they can cause, the existentialist threat that they pose, and the level of insecurity they create. In this regard, Guyana reaffirms its commitment to and pledges its continued support to achieving global nuclear disarmament. Madam Chair, while the entry into force of the treaty is a step in the right direction, its intended legal effect is hindered when one considers that no nuclear weapon state has signed, let alone ratified the treaty. This diminution of the treaty's effect is further compounded by growing distrust and global tensions between nuclear states. Consequently, these states continue to spend inordinate sums of money, time, and other valuable resources to create faster, more accurate weapons. Unfortunately, such actions only serve to move total nuclear disarmament further away from our grasp. Some states continue to insist on the importance of nuclear weapons to their national security. However, nuclear weapons provide only a false sense of security and cause inexpressible human psychological effects, particularly the perpetual fear of a crippling war and anxiety of losing one's life. The devastating bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki remain glaring reminders of the human suffering that these weapons are capable of causing. And we have also seen the destructive impact they place on the environment. Contemplation of the catastrophic humanitarian and environmental consequence that would follow any use of nuclear weapons should erase any sense of security derived from their possession. And so as we celebrate this milestone, and as we commemorate the entry into force of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, let us renew our commitment and redouble our efforts to realize a nuclear weapon-free world. This will truly provide the security and peace the peoples of the world deserve. I thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Your Excellency. And now it is my honor to give the floor to Ambassador Frank Tressler Zamorano, Permanent Representative of Chile to the UN Office and other international organizations in Geneva. You have the floor, Ambassador.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, Ambassador Flores, distinguished colleagues, friends, excellencies. Let me start by thanking the distinguished delegations present at this event for organizing this timely commemorative virtual event on the entry in force of the TPNW. It is a pleasure for me to be here with you today celebrating virtually the entry in force of the landmark Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. Excellency, colleagues, Chile's participation in the negotiations toward the TPNW was the next logical step in what has been a consistent strengthening of a Latin American treaty-based commitment to eliminate nuclear weapons under an international security imperative in the frameworks of both cooperative security and, above all, human security. As we stated during the negotiations of the treaty back in 2017, an evidence-based objective analysis of nuclear weapons on international security must conclude that these are the largest factor of global insecurity, and that states that acquire them to increase their own security are now captives of the false trap of nuclear deterrence. In the words of His Holiness Pope Francis in Nagasaki in 2019, peace and international stability are incompatible with attempts to build upon their fear of mutual destructions of the threat of total annihilation. Close side. Moreover, we remain firmly committed to the humanitarian approach to nuclear disarmament, which allows us to link the high-level security discussions to wider basic human concerns, the devastating humanitarian and environmental consequences of the use of atomic weapons, the clear and present dangers of accidental detonations, and the radical incompatibility that exists between their possession and use and the general standards of international humanitarian law and the international human rights framework. Setting out the treaty in this context, Chile's view of the TPNW as a key added instrument of the global architecture of peace and security. One that, in the medium-long run, will also strengthen the other global governance agenda as the SDGs, climate change agendas, and among others. Most notable in itself, the TPNW has already set out important milestones, such as highlighting the important role and contribution of women to nuclear disarmament, while at the same time acknowledging the role of victims and survivors to keep the memory alive on one of the darkest hours of humanity. I am happy to announce that as yesterday, the signed treaty has entered into the Chilean Congress for its final ratification, which confirms our resolve towards the free nuclear weapons world. Finally, today, we start a new chapter in the TPNW. The international community has successfully completed the initial phase of a political process, which is also at the same time the starting point of a new narrative to which Chile commits itself to contribute, not only as an individual country, but as part of a coalition of state, organizations, civil society, and academia committed to keep working side by side until the very day nuclear weapons cease to exist. I thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ambassador, also for the good news. We hope to have your ratification as soon. Now we will listen to a video message by Her Excellency, Ms. Grata Enda Guerdanintias, Chargé d'Affaires ad interim for the Permanent Mission of the Republic of Indonesia to the UN, WTO, and other organizations.
Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Government of Indonesia, I am honored to virtually join the commemoration of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, or TPNW, today. The entry into force of TPNW indeed warrant a celebration all over the world, as finally, first, nuclear weapons are subject of a comprehensive prohibition of a globally applicable treaty. Second, we have unbiased and non-discriminatory international non-proliferation mechanism. And third, we could close a legal gap in the nuclear disarmament architecture, complement existing international agreement on nuclear weapons, in particular the NPT. Indonesia would like to commend the leading role of the 51st states that have ratified the treaty, paving the way for the entry into force of the treaty today. Indonesia has never wavered in its support toward the international effort on nuclear non-proliferation and disarmament. Currently, Indonesia is still under the process to ratify the treaty. We are, however, very hopeful that by the time the first meeting of the state party be held early next year, Indonesia will be joining as a state party. Today's celebration is definitely a beginning of a new chapter. There are much more to be done, particularly in promoting the universalization of the treaty. One state outside the treaty is still too many. We welcome the important tools such as ratification kit, model law, a briefing note to support the ratification by state. We hope that more practical measures could be further developed and more engagement with wider stakeholders could be held to help countries in understanding, then in joining, and eventually in implementing the treaty. To conclude, let me once again affirm Indonesia's commitment to the achievement and maintenance of a world free of nuclear weapons. I thank you.
Thank you very much. Now the floor is to Ms. Natasha Bartolini, Deputy Permanent Representative of San Marino to the UN. Madam, you have the floor.
Thank you, Ambassador. Excellencies, dear colleagues, the Republic of San Marino is thrilled to be part of this landmark celebration. As you may know, San Marino is a country devoted to peace and dialogue, and that has never possessed nuclear weapons. In its long history, the Republic of San Marino has always stood for a world free of weapons of mass destruction, including nuclear weapons, whose catastrophic humanitarian consequences constitute an existential threat to humanity. In 2017, with the adoption of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, we sent the world a clear message. Any use or threat of use of nuclear weapons is a violation of international humanitarian law, as well as of environmental and human rights law. Currently, a deteriorating international security environment and rising nuclear risks have made the goal of a world free of nuclear weapons more urgent than ever. Today, with the entry into force of the TPNW, we are making another step towards our vision of a world free of nuclear weapons. Any alternative to this vision would be simply unthinkable. This treaty and its entry into force constitute, therefore, a significant element of our nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation framework. We are therefore proud to celebrate this historic achievement with you today, and we would like to thank the UN, governments, the International Committee of the Red Cross, ICANN, all the officers and all the stakeholders and the civil society that, with their tireless efforts and determination, have made this possible. We still have many challenges ahead, but today we look at a brighter future for all of us, and we call on all countries to join our courageous vision and to join this landmark treaty. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Now the floor to Mr. Pedro Dalcero, Deputy Permanent Representative of Brazil to the Conference on Disarmament. You have the floor, Pedro.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Ambassador. The entry into force of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons today represents an evolutionary leap for the international disarmament and non-proliferation regime. With the TPNW in place, the moral and legal barrier against the possession, use, and threat of nuclear weapons will increase significantly. The words of the United Nations Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, demonstrate the importance of the treaty, defined by him, and I quote, an additional pillar of the nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation regime, unquote. Since the first use of nuclear weapons in 1945, it has become gradually clear that they represent an existential threat to humanity's survival. The need to eliminate nuclear weapons is recognized by the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, the NPT, adopted in 1968, considered the linchpin of the nuclear non-proliferation and disarmament regime. Nevertheless, after 5 decades of discussions in the context of the NPT and in the Conference on Disarmament, the goal of complete, irreversible, and verifiable nuclear disarmament remains distant. Despite the encouraging developments of the immediate post-Cold War period, the threat of nuclear war has been growing rather than decreasing in the last 20 years. Meanwhile, the multilateral fora responsible for addressing the issue are marred by recurrent stalemates. In this context of paralysis, discussions on the humanitarian dimension of nuclear weapons began after the 2010 Review Conference of the NPT. They gained traction during the Oslo, Nairite, and Vienna Conference, which made a pivotal contribution to reviving the sense of urgency around nuclear disarmament, thus creating the conditions for the TPNW. Brazil actively participated in these efforts, being one of the proponents of the United Nations General Assembly's resolution that convened the international conference to negotiate the treaty. Brazil also had the honor of being the first country to sign the treaty on September 20, 2017. The treaty is currently under consideration by the Brazilian National Congress with a view to its ratification. While the ratification of the TPNW still depends on the sovereign decision of the legislative branch, Brazil's support for the treaty is consistent with its historical stance in favor of nuclear disarmament. It is also congruent with its constitutional principles on the exclusively peaceful uses of nuclear energy and the prevalence of human rights and humanitarian law in international relations. The ban on nuclear weapons has the merit of stigmatizing even further the most lethal, indiscriminate, disproportionate weapons ever invented, weapons capable of causing the extinction of the human species. Today, therefore, represent a historic landmark, which will be remembered and celebrated by generations to come. I thank you, Madam Chair.
Muchas gracias. Thank you very much to Brazil. Now I will give the floor to the last speaker of this segment, that is His Excellency Raúl Heredia, Deputy Permanent Representative of Mexico in Geneva. Ambassador, please, you have the floor. Ambassador Heredia, you have the floor, please. Can you unmute yourself, please, because we can't hear you. We cannot hear you. You seem.
Now, can you hear me now?
Yes, now we hear you. Go ahead.
Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you for giving me the floor. Mexico is really honored and pleased to take part in this celebration. The entry into force of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons that convenes us today represents an historic and momentous achievement towards the noble and long-awaited cause of a world free of nuclear weapons. Historically, Mexico has been firmly committed to nuclear disarmament and unilaterally decided to never develop nuclear weapons or allow their installation by other countries in our territory. We have insisted in the need to rid humanity of nuclear weapons, recognizing that they are a global danger, and therefore that is in the interest of humanity to fight for their prohibition and total elimination. The Treaty of Tlatelolco is a clear proof of this commitment. For more than 50 years, the states of Latin America and the Caribbean have collectively decided to act in accordance with this common good and shown that a world free of nuclear weapons is not an attainable dream. This treaty represents a victory, a triumph of a modern and effective multilateral diplomacy. Faced with these catastrophic humanitarian consequences that put the world population at risk, as well as development, the environment, global health, and food security, the General Assembly decided to assume its role and responsibility to face global challenges. There was full understanding that for this achievement to be successful, it needed a committed cooperation of all fundamental stakeholders, states, international organizations, academia, and the crucial role of civil society, Hibakusha, and victims of nuclear weapons. We are convinced that in a context of growing international tensions and diminishing trust between states, the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons will contribute to the strengthening of the nuclear non-proliferation and disarmament regime, and therefore to peace and global security. However, as other speakers has clearly stated, entry into force of the treaty is not the ultimate goal. We believe that is the beginning of a process that seeks its universalization and needs its committed and full implementation to generate incentives to achieve the elimination of nuclear weapons. Mexico today will celebrate the entry into force of the treaty with several activities at the national and international level. Just let me highlight a couple of points. On this date, Mexico will present its national declaration to the UN Secretary General as required under the Article 2 of the treaty. We call on all other states parties to the treaty to fulfill this obligation with the urgency required, reminded that it needs to be presented 30 days after the entry into force. In compliance with the obligation contained in Article 12, we will carry out several actions both in capital and by our embassies around the world to encourage states that are not parties to ratify, accept, approve, or adhere to it in order to achieve the universality of the treaty. And finally, in this sense, Ambassador, dear colleagues, Mexico urges the states, in particular the Latin American and Caribbean states, that have not yet done so, to ratify or adhere to this treaty, and with this, to continue contributing as we did half a century ago to the strengthening of international peace and security and a world free of nuclear weapons. I thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ambassador. And we have concluded the comments by states. Now we are moving towards the closure of our event. And let me give the floor to one of the co-organizers that I appreciate very much all the support. That is His Excellency Robert Mueller, head of the delegation of Austria for Disarmament Affairs in Geneva. Ambassador, and you have the floor.
Madam Ambassador, dear Socorro, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I have been very impressed by the powerful high-level statements and interventions we all heard today. Let me start with a personal reflection. Growing up in the shadow of the Iron Curtain, and when first confronted with the fact that my hometown too could be a target of a nuclear attack, I imagined whether I would be killed immediately from a detonation or whether I would die only a few seconds or minutes later because of the result of radiation or fallout. Nowadays, the imminent danger seems less grave, but we should not fool ourselves. There are around 14,000 warheads worldwide, and nuclear weapons remain part of existing military doctrines and modernization programs. Faced with a global pandemic, its economic and social consequences, climate change, environmental challenges, and now also falling back on the implementation of the SDGs, we have to underline what every school child already knows. Humanity cannot afford to waste valuable resources on nuclear weapons. We need a serious new allocation of financial and other resources to cope with the manifold challenges we have to face collectively. Today is a day of celebration. President Maurer called it a victory for humanity. The TPNW entry into force is historic. After decades of stalemate in nuclear disarmament, as of today, the most destructive weapons of mass destruction are prohibited by international law. Today, with the unequivocal legal basis of the prohibition, we have achieved a major step towards the total elimination. But our goal of a nuclear weapon-free world will be a marathon. The catastrophic humanitarian consequences are unacceptable. Hiroshima and Nagasaki, but also Chernobyl and Fukushima, have given the broad public an idea of the devastation and the long-term consequences of radiation. We cannot base the survival of humanity on mere luck. We cannot lean back in the hope that this luck will prevail forever. Nuclear disarmament is a cause that affects all countries, and the overwhelming support of the treaty, 130 votes at the General Assembly, is a strong reflection of that. We call on all states to join the TPNW. The TPNW is also a strong and encouraging sign of multilateralism. It demonstrates that when states, international organizations, civil society, and let me explicitly mention here the role of ICANN, the ICRC, but also the Hibakusha. When we work tirelessly together for a higher cause, we can achieve progress. Now, it is also time to set the parameters for the treaty mechanisms. The obligation of the states parties for universalization is key. We are delighted that the first meeting of states parties will take place at the United Nations in Vienna. According to the treaty, the meeting is to take place within 1 year after entry into force. In times of pandemic, planning is a challenge. But currently the UN is looking into dates to hold the meeting in the coming winter. And we, Austria, look forward and hope to see all of you there in the full spirit of inclusivity, transparency, dialogue, and cooperation. Austria is convinced that participation of all stakeholders is crucial, and we will do our utmost to achieve this when we all meet in Vienna. In conclusion, so once again, congratulations to all states who have already made up their mind that in the interest of humanity, the humanitarian consequences and risks posed by nuclear weapons explosions, be it by accident, miscalculation, or deliberately, only give us one option, and that is the comprehensive prohibition contained in the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. Let us work together to make the decades-old call of total elimination a reality. In conclusion, I want to thank the other members of the core group for the excellent cooperation and all colleagues, in particular Alonso and Christoph, who worked tirelessly behind the scenes, who made this important event possible. Thank you very much, Madam Ambassador. And back to you.
Thank you so much, Robert. Thank you very much to this group and to your delegations. And I really want to express my appreciation to all delegations. I know that several others wanted to take the floor. Unfortunately, we didn't have enough time. We went beyond for half an hour. So I really thank all of you for staying with us, and we look forward to continue our collaboration. On behalf of the organizers, the missions, the permanent missions of Austria, Brazil, Costa Rica, Indonesia, Ireland, Mexico, Nigeria, New Zealand, South Africa, and Thailand, we thank you very much for joining us in this event of celebration. As many of you have said, this is a historic achievement and also the beginning of a new journey where we are going to continue working together towards the elimination of nuclear weapons. So have a very good day wherever you are. Thank you very much again for being with us, and we'll keep working. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.